Before we start, Laura, I'm going to have to duck out for a doctor's appointment that I can't miss in about 20 minutes or so. So I will be absent for an hour.
All righty. Are all the board members present, ready to start our meeting?
Yep.
All right, so let's do it. Thank you for joining us today, January 27th, for our first meeting of the year for the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. We have a pretty nice agenda for the next few hours. You all received a copy of the agenda. So with that, I guess we'll just get started with some quick introductions. I'm Laura Anderson, and I am the director of the Oregon Ocean Science Trust. And other members, if you could introduce yourselves.
Sure, I'm Christina Volniakovsky, and I'm a member of the trust board.
Kim Sumich, member of the trust.
Shelby Walker, member of the trust.
Steve Marks, member of the trust.
Okay, and we have a few presenters with us today. Could you introduce yourselves also, please? Perhaps we'll start with you, Jack, and then Karen.
Hi, Laura, and other OOST members. Jack Barth from Oregon State University, listening in as co-chair of the OAH Council.
Hi, this is Karen Bravey. Good afternoon, Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and interested in the entire agenda today, and we'll be presenting on the Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Council.
Great, and then our presenters with a coin. I think we have Will on and Andy also. I don't know if you're presenting, but.
Sorry, I was having some microphone issues. Hi, everybody. I'm Will Claybor. I'm the chair of the steering committee for the Oregon Coastal and Ocean Information Network. Very excited to speak with you all today.
Great. And other members of the public, would you mind just introducing yourselves so that we know who's in our Zoom room here?
Hi, this is Charlie Plavin, the Oregon Policy Manager for Surfrider Foundation.
Hi, Courtney Flatherson, Senator Jeff Merkley's office, just listening in for the first hours.
Gina Carter, Coast and Marine Director for the Nature Conservancy.
Hi, this is Kristen Don with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Great. And staff for DSL?
Hi, everybody. Andrea Celentano. I'm a policy and legislative analyst with the Oregon Department of State Lands, and I help support the OOST.
Hi, this is Lonnie and Madian, and I am executive support for the Department of State Lands, and I'm just here to help administer the call.
Ted Bright from DSL IT. I'm just here for technical support.
Okay, and Ted, your microphone, I don't know, for me, I was really unable, it was barely audible. And okay, it looks like we just had one more join us. Jeff Wilkie, we're just doing introductions of the public members. Would you care to introduce yourself?
Jeff Wilkie, the naval architect, just representing myself today, though.
Great. Is there anybody that I didn't hear from on the call? Okay, great. So first order of business will be to approve the July 12th meeting summary. Just want to thank the DSL staff for taking such very nice and detailed meeting notes. They were very helpful. Are there any comments or corrections to the notes from the board members?
No, I didn't see anything that needed correcting.
Okay, I had one just part that was unclear, and let's see, make sure I get my document open here. I know I should have had that done already, but on the last section, meeting summary draft. I felt like the very last section under discuss possible dates and topics for next meeting, the third bullet point didn't complete. It says discuss support of Marine Reserves assessment grant with Director Walker with regard to. For some reason, I'm not sure if we need any more detail there, or if we just want to strike with regard to, and perhaps maybe just for ease and clarification, add Director Vicky Walker, because we do have board member Shelby Walker, who is a director of another organization in her own right. So just to make that clarification.
I did notice that my name was spelled correctly sometimes and incorrectly other times. So Christina has 2 Y's. So if we could make that correction, that would be great.
That's been true all your life, hasn't it, Christine?
It is true. I always ask why.
I could definitely make that correction. I apologize, Christina.
Great. So those 2 corrections have been requested. Are there any others? All right, shall we entertain a motion to approve?
So moved.
I'll second.
All right, first by Jim, second by Christina. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye, and Laura, just for
Shelby.
clarification, yeah, I seconded Shelby.
Shelby.
Oh, thank you. The noise is coming from that corner of my screen with two faces there. Okay, Shelby seconded, and so any opposed? I think everybody said aye, so that passes. Right, the first order of business for the agenda of new business is an update on the Marine Reserves assessment process. So it's been quite a while since our last meeting. Well, it was July, and a lot has happened in that time. So after the last meeting, staff filed the rule changes that we had approved, and I signed the agreement with the Oregon Community Foundation in late July. And then in late July, August, and September, we started some conversations with funders for the Marine Reserves Assessment Program. And Shelby wrote multiple grant proposals, and I submitted them. We had a mixed bag of approvals and some denials, but here we are in January with a handful of very strong supporters for this project, which is going to ensure that the project is going to move forward. So the summary of that is the Packard Foundation is, so the total funding secured to date is $140,000. Packard has committed 75. Pew Charitable Trusts has committed 20. The Marisla Fund of Orange County committed 10. They do wish to remain anonymous, and I don't have a problem saying that in this meeting, but in print materials and so forth moving forward, we probably won't list them, their name as such. We have $25,000 from the Oregon Ocean Conservation Fund, which is a fund that is housed at the Oregon Community Foundation, and it's a collaboration of Lazar Foundation, Harder, and Packard. And we have 10,000 fairly securely committed from the state's Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. That one is kind of an interesting one. It was the program that was set up to be a legislative matching grant program. And when that funding was pulled back during COVID, that group forged ahead with private fundraising and has been able to allocate funds to at least 9 projects, or I think 8 projects to date. We ranked number 9 on their list, so we didn't make the first round of funding, but it's approved and we're at the top for their next round of funding. So we're kind of just waiting, and they expect to have those funds. I wouldn't be surprised if it was in the next month or so. That one is a little bit interesting because there is a potential for legislative match still. They're going to attempt to get a 30% match for the projects that they're funding with the legislature this year. That's going to be kind of a wait and see. But some of our funders have agreed to allow their funds to flow through the Oregon Conservation Recreation Fund with the hope that it will get matched. And if it doesn't, it's really pretty low risk. They're good partners and there's no cost. So there's really no drawback to at least showing the legislature, hey, private monies have come forward for all kinds of projects all over the state. This one is just one of many. And the worst case scenario is that there's no match that comes through. But so there's still a potential for some more funds to be allocated from that process. So that's what happened in funding news.
Very good.
Any questions on that at this juncture? I really want to thank Shelby for all of the writing that she did for the grants, and for Steve's help in getting Pew involved in the project. Those were really, really key keys to getting us where we're at today.
Laura, if I may.
Please.
First, thank you for all of your dedicated effort. I know this is a result of many, many conversations. And I certainly really appreciate all of your work. I know that we had hoped to elicit a little bit more support from groups outside of the philanthropic organizations. That wasn't really successful. But my hope is that in using the OOST mechanism with the Oregon Community Foundation, we can mitigate any kind of perceptions of outside influence or anything like that in support of the Marine Reserves assessment process. I feel really confident, but to be determined tomorrow at the STAC meeting, that with the funds available, we should be able to pursue the assessment process as originally outlined in the STAC deliberations and an RFP that's in place. Of course, we'll have that conversation tomorrow, and if there are any changes coming out of that, the process will be modified appropriately. Just Laura, quick question. If I could, I think my math might be wrong. Can I just run through what you outlined, which was Packard was 75, Pew 25, Marissa 10, the Conservation Fund was 25, and then the OCRF was 10?
Okay, I may have misspoke, but Pew is 20.
20, great. All right, thank you so much. And that's it for me.
Well, on behalf of the other trust members, Jim and I, thank you very much for all your work on that. It's very encouraging to see our work with the Oregon Community Foundation panning out so quickly.
Yes, thanks, Chair Laura and Dr. Walker for all that you guys have been doing on this. I did just following up on Dr. Walker's comment and looking ahead. If I recall from the RFP, there was kind of a tentative timeline of having it released early this year and a potential selection of the academic institution by April. Is that still, if everything goes according to what you envision, is that still a possibility, or are we looking at a potential extended timeline? Is there any sense of the likelihood of what the impacts of this financial discussion have on that timeline as far as the RFP and selection of the institution?
So there may be some flex in the timeline. We did build, a little bit of buffer into it this year. Certainly a major holding point was determining the available resources because that was going to dictate really what we could be doing for the assessment. So in terms of next steps, again, to be discussed tomorrow with the STAC will be, and of course, additional conversations with the UST and OCF, how we actually, set up the process, deal with the mechanism and who will actually be running the proposal process. But my hope is that we can get that resolved fairly easily. So while it might not be the exact timeline, I don't think we're going to be too far off of it.
Great, thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think those are that's a good summary of the next steps. For UST, our role has been just in terms of being a fiscal partner and supporting fundraising. We're not responsible for administering the RFP or the assessment program, but we'll just continue to coordinate with STAC and OCF as kind of the intermediary to make sure that all of the grant requirements are met to the funders with the expectations of what they set forth when they wrote their checks. So from my perspective, UST is kind of just in a little bit of a less active role at this point. We've done the bulk of the fundraising. I'm not actively out seeking additional funds. I think that we've probably tapped most of, if there are funds that we didn't receive, it was because it wasn't a good fit for that organization or budget constraints for that organization, what have you. So it's really on STAC now to contract with getting the RFP out. So yeah, get the job done. I don't really have much else on that. I would just maybe ask us to reflect for a moment just on maybe some thoughts for the future. This is the first active project we've taken on, and we didn't write any administrative expense into the grant proposals. We didn't incur any administrative expense to date, just because we've done this on in-kind time. But I think we should think about the future and whether or not what is a sufficient carve out of any future projects that we may undertake so that we can build a fund to either hire somebody to do the work or support the work in other ways. So, kind of the rough math that if this project were being done again, 4% of the total amount would be about $5,000 or $6,000. I probably I tried to rough it out in my head. I might have 70 or 80 hours total into this over a period of the last 6 or 7 months. So I just wanted to put that out there as something to think about, what kind of administrative fees we might want to assess on future fundraising efforts of this sort. So any thoughts on that or comments? We don't have any other projects pending right now, so something to think about.
Laura, as we think about the, what type of admin fee would be appropriate, I think it's also going to be informed by the type of role that's played. If it is more of the engagement that you've done with respect to partners, that's one thing. If it's more proposal administration, I feel like that's another thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it may be variable. And just sort of backing up very briefly to the assessment, because STAC has no contracting authority, OOST isn't out of the woods just yet. So we'll need to have some conversations about what that looks like moving forward.
Yes, and those will happen with OCF as well, because we've got a lot of partners involved here. So yeah. All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments on Marine Reserve's assessment, I think we could move forward with our update from Karin on the OAOH Council.
Super. I am planning on sharing my screen. I'm just saying hello with video right now, but I have limited connectivity, so I'm planning on stopping my video. And I have sent a PDF version of my slides to Andrea, so if there are connectivity issues, please interrupt me and we can pivot to another presentation mode. So with that, I'm going to turn off my video and share my screen. And I'm assuming you guys can hear me just fine. And I'm assuming that you can see my first slide.
That would not be a correct assumption. Oh, I can see.
Are you looking at my notes page?
I see your PowerPoint screen now. Yes.
Great. Okay, wonderful. All right. Well, I am thankful for your time today and happy to give an update on the OAH Council. And I am joined by my co-chair, Dr. Jack Barth. So we appreciate being able to share a little bit about what we have been up to and what we're looking to do this upcoming year. I'm happy to answer questions at the end. If you can grab my attention while I'm presenting, I'm fine being interrupted as well. So do what seems best to you as I go along. And I will just go ahead and kind of get into it after explaining that the OAH Council, or the Ocean Acidification and Hypoxia Council, is now in its going into its 4th year. And between the OOST and the OAH Council, we have overlap in membership. So both Shelby Walker and Jim Sumich are members of the OAH Council. So there's a lot of obvious overlap in interest and efforts to move some of these issues forward. And we're glad to have you guys as a partner. So going back, kind of to the problem statement, I can't help but just take the opportunity to describe our context and why we have such a deep commitment to this issue in Oregon. And it really starts with the increasing levels of carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, but then the associated ecosystem symptoms. And we're much more familiar as humans, we're more familiar with the ones we see on land. In the last few years have been really dramatic in terms of changes in precipitation and extreme weather and so on that are potentially associated with climate change. But in the ocean, we have observed changes related to increasing carbon dioxide, most obviously in acidification rates, temperature, and oxygen. But it's a multi-stressor response to increasing carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. These are some of my favorite go-to projects to show data. I'm a scientist by background, and so I love seeing the actual data showing us about these changes rather than just the quick facts. And for ocean acidification, we're seeing not only in the upper graph, we're seeing the red line increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide, but perfectly mirroring that is an increase in dissolved carbon dioxide in sea surface, as well as the opposite trend in pH or acidity, with that being an opposite scale to carbon dioxide. And so you see this beautiful reflection of what we're seeing in the atmosphere in the water itself. And these data are from a station around the Hawaiian Islands. That's one of our most important reference sites. And then for hypoxia, to my knowledge, we're still struggling to find a long-term trend data set. But what we are capturing and really starting to appreciate is seasonal depression of oxygen in key locations on our coast in Oregon. And so this has now been termed the hypoxia season. Francis Chan and Jack Barth and others have produced the data set here, with the black line being a long-term mean in hypoxia across the season, and the red line being last year's observations, and just remarking that it's fabulous that those data were able to be collected even with the extreme situation we found ourselves in 2020 with COVID and field work restrictions. And so what you see is that there is this seasonal depression, lasts for some period of time. That's been consistent over time. The 2020 pattern was at the extreme edge, or the low end of that long-term mean. And so there's ongoing work to describe this seasonal hypoxia and what it means, but I can tell you as a fisheries manager that we have seen impacts that are so far more or less anecdotal, observational, rather than kind of rigorous scientific descriptions of them, but anecdotal evidence that both crab and halibut have shown very large changes in distribution as a result of hypoxia seasons. And hypoxia and ocean acidification and climate change have been associated with things like whale entanglement increases in fixed gear fisheries. So these are things that we're seeing with our eyes, both in terms of the physical oceanography as well as impacting fisheries and species distributions that are challenging for management. In terms of the actual harvest, seafood harvest, here's some dollar figures just to start putting some scale on what's at risk in terms of Oregon seafood. And this is only a portion of it, but it gives you some of our big hitters, including aquaculture associated with the Pacific oyster, the pink shrimp, wild fish fishery, Dungeness crab, salmon, and ground fish. So we're talking about, you know, a huge amount of sales of seafood from harvesters to buyers, and then even beyond these amounts shown here, community effects and economic magnification of those values through processing and selling of those seafood products. So just from that one perspective, seafood values and support of coastal economics and communities, this is something that really poses a serious risk to Oregon. And so the Oregon Coordinating Council was formed through legislative action similarly to the OOST, and we started convening in 2018. Our current roster is shown here. We have just filled our vacancy in shellfish, and I'm on the spot, and I am not recalling the name of the woman who is about to be appointed, but that's good that we'll have a full roster. And you can see also that this roster is diverse with agencies, collaborators like the Ocean Science Trust and Sea Grant, and then representatives from conservation, fisheries, shellfish, the academic community, tribal representatives, and we do have a governor's representative as well. Over the last 3 years, we've filed 2 biennial reports, which are part of our mandate under the legislation that created the OOST. The last one just being last September. And then the council has also been tapped by the governor through a separate policy decision to develop and help implement Oregon's ocean acidification and hypoxia action plan, which is very much tied to the content and format of both of the reports that we filed with the legislature. So all 3 reports, the 2 reports and the action plan all followed the same themes and actually have a lot of the same content, just with different dates and different specificity on what we are doing with those particular concepts. So the 5 themes for the action plan and the reports are science, reducing causes of ocean acidification and hypoxia, promoting resilience and adaptation, raising awareness, both on the science or causes and solutions. And then finally, committing resources to action or building of institutions. So from my perspective, the OOST is an example of committing resources to action and building the infrastructure, the framework, the policy framework we need to put money where it's needed and fill information gaps and make progress on addressing these issues. And these 5 theme areas are actually centered around similar themes that are codified in the International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification mandate or agreement. And that group, also known as the OA Alliance, is a group that was formed in 2016. Oregon was a founding member, and the action plan that the governor asked the council to develop is part of our agreement with that OA Alliance group. Our agreement with that OA Alliance group to build an action.
Karin, I'm not sure if it's just me.
So
but
not only are these 2 reports related, the action plan completed by Washington, California, and part of that discussion. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about work we've done on science and monitoring. And I heard part of what you said, Laura, and that may be the problem that you're having hearing.
For those like Christina, are you having issues with hearing Karen, or is it just on my end? She's saying yes, so I think
Yes.
we're having that connectivity thing.
Yeah, I'm having trouble hearing as well.
Okay.
So Karin sent me PDFs of her slides. I can definitely share them. Karin, I don't know if that would help maybe with your bandwidth issue. If you stop sharing, maybe then we can hear you. We could definitely try that. Let's see. Okay, so it's not a pretty PowerPoint, it's PDFs. But here we go. Can you guys see?
Yeah, it looks great.
Would be great. I can also.
You're still cutting out, Karin.
And thank.
I see Jack chiming in here as backup.
Sure. Hi, Laura. Yeah, Karen, maybe sign out and sign back in, and I'll hold the fort here a second. See if
I can
that.
also.
Laura,
Poor Karin, it's been all year like this for her. Every meeting from her house, she has bandwidth issues. So I feel for her.
I'll just I can go for a little bit and she can come right back.
Thank you. That'd be great, Jack. Go ahead.
Okay. So as Karen was describing, we have these 5 action areas, and that theme 1 is the science and monitoring. So if we could go to the next slide. So this is just some of the work we've been doing. There's some work in the estuaries, in the bays. This is one monitoring project in Tillamook Bay in cooperation with Oregon DEQ, OSU, and others, actually getting pH and CO2 sensors into Tillamook Bay. That work is ongoing, but as with all things, searching for funding to keep the operations going. So next one, please.
Snap.
And then I'll just ask, is that Karen that called in on the phone?
I am on the phone.
All right.
But you're doing great,
slides?
Jack. Keep going.
Can you see the slides, Karen? We're up to the highlights on the Yaquina Bay monitoring.
Okay. Yeah, no, I'm just getting dialed in on the slides, but Yaquina Bay.
I'll go through the next section and then you can take over.
Fantastic. Perfect.
This is another, so what we said is, we ought to at least be making good measurements in each of our major estuaries. So just going down the coast, here's the idea for Yaquina Bay. There's been a very nice group of chemists and US EPA, others at Hatfield, putting together an observing effort in Yaquina Bay. We've been writing a couple of grants trying to find some funds for that. So next, please. And then jumping down to theme 4, which is our raising awareness on all the impacts and that sort of thing. And here I'll invite Karen if she'd like to come back in.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I'm still waiting for the slides to load on Zoom, but they're coming. So on outreach and education planning under theme 4, we have assembled a terrific group of people to participate in our working group. And we have a few of you on the phone, including a public member who are helping us with developing our materials and our plans around communicating and raising awareness in the state and regionally. And so I just want to acknowledge that these folks have put in a good amount of time, and we're hoping that they will continue to do so as we strive to improve our materials, our outreach materials. So if you can go to the next slide. I have to say next. Yep, this shows you who is involved in that. And the next one, next slide, shows you just a very few of the outreach materials that we've developed, including at this point somewhat older backgrounder document on research needs, a somewhat newer one on taking action, and then to the right, this past year we had an intern work with us to create some Spanish translations of some of our materials as well, recognizing that was a gap in our outreach strategy. So this is a work in progress and something that's very central to our needs and our discussions as a council. So next slide is getting to that committing resources to OAH actions. And if we go to the next one. This is an excerpt from the action plan. So this is the 2019 action plan. And the letter that I showed you in the earlier slide was, it is actually one of the pages in the action plan, and that is the governor's issued policy, so to speak, asking the OAH Council to move forward with this action plan and adopt it for Oregon. And in that, under theme 5, is the step to ask the agencies to document existing programs and policies that relate to ocean change in particular, but really being fairly broad and thinking about climate change as well, and the agency authorities and policies related to that, as well as looking forward to future needs for these agencies, whether it be policy augmentations or funding related to staffing or project funds, things like that. And so this work is in progress right now. And the next slide shows the agencies that are identified. DSL is one of them, and Andrea has been our point for DSL, working on the section for the DSL contribution to a multi-agency assessment and report that will be filed next month with the legislature. So along with DSL, OHA, energy, forestry, DEQ, and ag, and ourselves, Fish and Wildlife, all will have sections under this report describing those different components, the kind of current management strategy and then the future improved management strategy if we could acquire additional capacity in a variety of ways, including policy. So this report will inform this legislative session, I'm sure, but really it's particularly going to focus attention in these agencies for the budget development process that will start for the 2023-2025 biennium. So that budget development process starts at least as soon as the current legislative session ends, if not sooner than that. So June, July, that kind of time frame. This report is also a good example of implementation of the governor's executive order 2004, which was issued last year, which calls for multi-agency collaboration and coordination, as well as the soon-to-be released climate adaptation framework that is being shepherded by DLCD, but is a multi-agency effort as well to describe and encourage across agency collaboration on climate issues, including ocean change. So next slide is a preview of this coming legislative session. And I understand that Representative Gomberg is not here today, but he is considering sponsorship of a bill that would resubmit a legislation piece that was introduced in 2019 and then 2020. And both of those legislative sessions, this legislation fell victim to the subject matter, the issues surrounding both of those legislative sessions. And so we're reintroducing this bill, or we being Oregon, under the leadership of Representative Gomberg. I understand that will be presented this week or next week to the legislature. And it will be the same as before. So my understanding is that there have been no changes to it, but I'll go into describing that briefly before I stop. So next slide. Some of the projects in the 2020 version of the bill, but again, same as always, includes monitoring, including the Aquina Bay monitoring project that we've already mentioned, estuary assessments, augmentation of the Newport hydrographic line to include biological sampling and analysis, additional OAH instrumentation, and particularly instrumentation at marine reserves, both intertidally and subtidally. So that is a big chunk of the funds that are requested through this legislation. And the next slide shows a couple of concepts for both economic and ecosystem resilience projects, so really under theme 3, including some modeling work, some coordination work and biological work around aquaculture in estuaries, mapping of Olympia oysters, and support of the mollusk and broodstock program specifically to promote and grow native oysters. Next slide. And so this last project is around theme 4, raising awareness, and is really focusing some funding to help us with the communications planning needed for addressing climate and ocean change communications issues. So those are the projects that are lined out in that legislation, which will become available sometime this week or next week, and will be part of the legislative discussion this spring. And with that, that's kind of what we're up to. I want to acknowledge Charlotte Regula Whitefield, who I don't know is on the phone, but she's our Superwoman staff support to the council. And she is currently on rotation for a couple of months, working on climate issues and other issues within ODFW for the Fish Division. And we look forward to her coming back. So Laura, other board members, happy to answer questions or discuss at your will.
Great, thank you. If you want, I don't know if it was Andrea or Lonnie sharing, but maybe we can cease the share and go back to our squares. Great, and questions first from board, and if there's time, we will try to extend that to public as well.
Can we get a link to the report? Can you send that out by email?
Great question. And yes, it's in this presentation. It's on our website at oreganocean.info, which is the ocean information page that DLCD maintains for a number of ocean issues in Oregon, including OPAC and the OAH Council, and a link to the Marine Reserves page. So yes, Christina, I'd be happy to send that to you all.
Thank you.
Hey, Karin, it's Shelby. So given what we anticipate to be a complicated, long session, what are people's feelings with respect to the potential for the bill moving forward?
That is a fantastic question, and I am going to treat it as a rhetorical question because I have no answers for you. I think you're absolutely right. It is going to be a challenge given the events of last year around COVID and wildfires and recovery from that economically and socially. And this bill is not part of that discussion, but certainly is important for our long-term resilience for Oregon. And so I'm glad to see it move forward because I don't feel like we have time to wait for a convenient time to deal with climate and ocean change.
Steve?
Thanks. Hey, thank you, Dr. Braby. Steve Marks here. Hope you're doing well. I had a couple questions, but I want to start off with your discussion of the Ocean Acidification Alliance. And I am wondering if that is the primary mechanism for interstate collaboration on ocean acidification issues currently, or if there are existing venues, thinking of like the West Coast Ocean Alliance, you know, the kind of current iteration of the regional planning body, or alternatively, I know that the Pacific Fishery Management Council is undergoing kind of a tri-state process looking at through its Climate and Communities Initiative. Do those arenas also address ocean acidification issues, whether it's on the monitoring and data collection side, or otherwise, or is the alliance that you mentioned in your presentation kind of the primary vehicle for interstate cooperation on this issue?
Yeah, hi Steve, nice to see you, and thanks for the question. There is so much in that question, and the answer to it, the brief question or the brief answer is that all of the institutions that you mentioned are ways that the states collaborate on ocean change. The International Alliance to Combat Ocean Acidification was created by California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia as founding members under what's called the Pacific Coast Collaborative, and it's a governor's level executive agreement among those jurisdictions to collaborate on climate and energy issues. So it's non-binding, non-regulatory, but it has produced an incredible amount of collaboration, particularly on ocean acidification and hypoxia. And it was through that collaboration that the OA Alliance was founded. Both of those are really policy level entities, and so they focus on that coordination, alignment, and communications support to reinforce the messages coming from each of the states on those issues. And then the modern version of the regional planning body, the West Coast Ocean Alliance, which exists despite the rollback of the National Ocean Policy created under President Obama. The West Coast Ocean Alliance still persists and is a great venue for coordinating between or among Washington, Oregon, and California. That's just a U.S. entity. different membership, different focus, but we do have on the phone today Andy Lanier, who is part of that discussion as well, and is one of the leads on the West Coast Ocean Data Portal, which is an information sharing, data sharing institution or thing, if you will. I'm not sure what to call it. It's a portal. It's a data portal, and so there's, depending on the institution or the level that you're talking about, you can get into just really interesting stories and ways that the states connect to each other on a policy level and a data level. And then you also mentioned the PFMC Climate and Communities Initiative, and as a member of that council also, that is something that is very much part of my portfolio personally as a manager. And yes, that is addressing future conditions, future outcomes that we might see around climate and ocean change, and how those specifically might shape future federal fisheries that are managed under the PFMC, and then what the impacts of those future states might look like for coastal communities. And so next week, February 2nd and 3rd, we're holding the fourth of 4 community workshops on that initiative to really kind of delve into some of the scenario planning that we've been doing and get additional input as the council tries to wrap up that exploratory process this year.
Thank you.
Karen, I have a question regarding Senate Bill 1554. In the original version last year, there was an allocation for the Marine Reserves assessment, $250,000. Presuming we're successful in doing what we've said we're going to do, do you anticipate asking to reappropriate those funds for something else, or just taking them out?
I am going to lean on Jack because I don't recall whether that was in this latest legislative concept or not. I thought that it was the same as before, but I have been very tangential to the discussion around dropping that bill again this session.
Yeah, hi, Laura, Jack here. So I just want to start off by saying that anything we're sharing is really ahead of the game here. It's up to the Coastal Caucus and respectfully Representative Gomberg to see what he does. But we think that he's interested in one from 2 years ago, which did not have the reserve assessment money in it. It was the short session that had that extra in it. So it would revert back all the way to the previous full biennium.
Okay. We'd always be happy to find ways to spend $250,000 on ocean science and nearshore research if there's any opportunity to retain that. I'm sure the Marine Reserves community programs and others could make good use of that. But I understand the situation, and it's going to be a hard sell in this session to try to it's hard to get attention for ocean science under the best of conditions in Salem, so as we've learned. So it is going to be a challenge. I wanted to, since we are running pretty good on schedule, I wanted to offer questions from our members of the public. And I asked anyone from a member of the public, if you want to put your name in the chat box, I'll just call in order. We have one so far from Charlie Plyben. Charlie?
Hey, thanks, Laura, and thanks, Karin, for that presentation. Question, kind of going through a session or two with that bill and seeing that it really fell on the backs of scientists and agency staff to carry that bill with the council itself, which is awkward at best in a legislative session. A full-time lobbyist is kind of your ideal, working with the Coastal Caucus on that. So I'm just curious about the expectations of the governor's office and the directive and the action plan for the agencies. And is this the mechanism that the governor anticipated? Or can we expect that someday in the governor's budget, we might see some POPs linked to the OAH action plan, particularly given the nexus of that and the climate agenda of this executive office?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I would love to ask Andy to answer a question about that, because DLCD has a policy option package as part of the governor's office right now. He may want to speak to that, but it was the intent of the agencies in that agency's report list, the eight agencies, to develop budget proposals in the internal budget process for each agency, both for this coming budget process for 21-23, as well as this summer and fall in preparation for 23-25. So that would be where agencies would promote policy option packages, and then your question is whether or not the governor would introduce some, and that is, that's certainly a potential, but that's not something I can conjecture on.
Thanks.
Andy?
Can you speak to the specific question? I caught my name. I've been multitasking, so.
I put you on the spot. I wondered if you wanted to speak to the policy option package on the climate adaptation vulnerability assessment that is in the governor's budget.
I believe that there were two packages that we had put forward. I believe one was supported by the governor's office, which was the effort to look at all of the statewide land use planning goals with a climate change and equity focus. I believe that has been supported. We are at the tail end of an effort to update the statewide climate change adaptation strategy. So that should be released in the coming year, very, very soon. And there may be proposals for implementation of some of those activities in the 23 to 25 time period. But the one that I'm aware of that made it through with the governor's recommended budget was to look at the goals with climate change and equity.
Thanks.
Great. Any other questions from the board? All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Braby and Dr. Barth, for bringing us up to speed. I presume if you have a specific ask or need for the OOST, we would have heard of it right now, but you're just trying to keep us looped in so that we're on the ready to work together, hopefully in the future. I know that OOST was called out as the funding conduit in at least the last version of 1554. So hopefully we'll be in a position to help and synergize your processes in the future.
Yep, it's our pleasure, and as you said, no specific ask today, but really appreciate staying in touch and aligned, and I'm happy to provide updates anytime we have an invitation. So thanks all.
All right, thank you. Okay. Let's see, we will move on to our next presenter, which is Will Klaber with a coin. And Will, do you have a presentation for us today?
We do not have slides for you guys today. But first of all, I just wanted to say thank you for allowing us to come and talk to you guys and including us in the agenda. Myself and a couple of other members of the OCOIN steering committee are here today to kind of update OOS on what we've been up to over the last couple of years and potentially reconnect our two organizations, and we'll get back to that in a little bit. First, I want to introduce the OCOIN steering committee members that are here with us today. So I do know some of you. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Will Klaber. I'm a recent graduate of the Marine Resource Management program at OSU. And I'm a current Knaus Fellow in Washington, D.C., representing Oregon Sea Grant. And I'm also the chair of the steering committee for OCOIN. Here with me today, you guys seem to know Andy pretty well. Andy sits on the OCOIN steering committee. Along with Andy is Elise Granick, who's a professor at Portland State University and one of the founding people of OCOIN, and then Hillary Johnson, who is a member of the Oregon State University Extension Office, who's on our communications and outreach subcommittee within OCOIN. And so to kick us off, I think I'm going to pass it over to Andy, who's going to do a brief reminder about the origins of OCOIN and sort of how OCOIN is connected to OOS before we get into some of our updates.
Great, thank you, Will.
Let's see, do we lose Andy?
Are you with us, Andy?
I am still here. I lost my Zoom meeting window. I was trying to turn my camera on for y'all.
Tabs you have open with all your multitasking.
Exactly right. So I just wanted to recognize that almost 10 years ago, the Nearshore Research Task Force came out with a set of recommendations. And one of those recommendations was actually that Oregon establish a science trust. The other of which is that Oregon work on better networking of research in the coastal environment and networking of the professionals who are part of that effort, as well as data that goes to support coastal and marine issues. So, 10 years from, now, or from ago, we didn't have a system to do this. And we have created kind of organically through small grant efforts over time, a system that has been built and maintained mostly by volunteers who have worked to develop a mapping tool that we'll describe a little bit later, but also a community of practitioners who have sought to better communicate amongst Oregon's academic institutions the ongoing research that's happening. And so I just want to call out and recognize the hard work that's been conducted over the past 10 years to kind of care and feed this system. There is a really nice mapping tool that's available through the Oregon Explorer system at OSU. And I think we need to think carefully about how we can continue to foster this community and this effort over time, because our state's resources continue to be limited. So the more we can do to leverage funding in our academic research institutions as well as our management agencies, that's going to, create improvements for us moving forward. So recognize that it's been kind of a long haul with not a lot of resources, but this community has built, some really nice products to be proud of. You can go back into the tool and look at research projects that have been entered to date to really get a sense of what the community's been up to. And I think as we begin to see the trust being used and others, hope that we can identify and work on synergies between what this group has built and what the trust would like to do as it moves forward into the future. I'll stop there and turn it back over to Will or Elise.
Thank you, Andy. And I can provide a short update on where we are now and what OCOIN kind of looks like today. But before that, Elise, would you want to talk about the activities and kind of accomplishments of OCOIN and the student involvement that we've had over the past couple of years?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Will. And thank you to UST for having us today. So yeah, OCOIN grew out of sort of two paths that converged. So one was the Nearshore network, and the other was a graduate student project that worked with EPA to identify needs around coastal research, basically. And it was identified through a series of workshops between practitioners and scientists that what was really needed was two-pronged. One was a location online that practitioners could access what kinds of research were being conducted and what kinds of data were available and who to reach out to get those data. But that practitioners also wanted access to scientists as part of a network, right? And so again, we have this, OCOIN is both a network of people and there's a physical or virtual presence online. And again, as Will mentioned, we got a grant through NOAA to really get this off the ground, and lots of volunteer time from folks like Andy and others early on to figure out what it should look like and how to get it up and running, and help from INR through the Coastal Atlas, Oregon Coastal, what's it called? I'm spacing on the name. Yes. Oregon Explorer. And we've also used a lot of our funding to support graduate student interns for about 4 or 5 years to really move things forward. Our funding ended maybe 2 years ago now, and we have been really grateful. Last year, Sea Grant supported a summer scholar, actually 3 summer scholars. Originally it was 1, but then there was need with COVID because it was easy for us to support remote summer scholars, and for other programs, it was harder for them to support remote summer scholars. So we actually ended up having 3 scholars that worked on the project. And it was excellent. There was a lot of progress made. But again, we don't have a sort of consistent source of funding, and we don't have folks that are paid to do this work. Again, everyone on the steering committee, we have about 10 people on the steering committee, and it's all volunteer work. And so we had talked early on years ago with UST when Luis Soliday was chair of UST, about whether we align with UST. And at the time, and I don't know if this is still true, but at the time, what she said is, yes, part of our responsibility is to make sure there's sharing of data between scientists and decision makers, and we would love to support you, but we have no money. So I think now that UST is sort of getting off the ground and figuring out ways to get funding, that's part of why we're coming back and saying, remember us, we would love to continue to do what we're doing, but we could use some support, and it doesn't even necessarily need to be a lot of support, but are there still synergies between us, and are there ways we can still work together to be that arm that's coordinating and recruiting researchers to put their data or their projects on Oregon Explorer, and having these annual meetings and that sort of thing. And I also wanted to give a huge shout out to Shelby and to Sea Grant because they have added as a component, and I just saw it on the other end for the first time recently. They've added a component when you're awarded funding from Sea Grant that they say that there's an expectation that you put your research on Oregon Explorer, on the coastal research tool, so that there's more engagement of researchers in Oregon, putting their research on Coastal Explorer so that decision makers and managers and practitioners have access to that research. So a huge shout out to Sea Grant for that. And I'll stop talking. Thank you, Will.
Of course. Thank you, Andy and Elise, for kind of bringing us up to speed. And so I don't have too much to add to what they were saying. We got together as a steering committee during our meeting last month and talked about kind of what's next for OCOIN as a group of volunteers. Right now we exist as, like Elise said, primarily we're 10 volunteers who all work in the ocean and coastal realm in Oregon. We have this online presence through our Coastal Research Explorer tool that got a nice facelift, and we're working on the Marine directory network. So as a way to sort of create an online presence for folks who work in the marine and coastal sectors in Oregon, a way for them to stay connected and find all of that information online. We also host an annual event that's usually pretty well attended by people across all sectors. But during our last steering committee meeting, we talked about the roots of OCOIN, what our next steps can be, and where we think this organization is going. And that ultimately led to sort of this common thread that we've been talking about, how Boost and OCOIN kind of came out of the same set of workshops, the same set of ideas, and how we think that some sort of partnership or shared initiatives with Boost may be able to sort of help us grow, challenge us to become something bigger and better than we are. And that's kind of why we're here today. So we'd love to hear the board's thoughts, the trust thoughts on OCOIN and kind of what we've had to share. And we're more than happy to answer any questions that you may have or that members of the public may have. But once again, thank you for including us on the agenda. We really appreciate it. Laura,
I think you're muted.
A rookie mistake, huh? Thank you to Will and Elise and Andy and Hillary all on the call. And also I went to the website, and our own Jim Sumich is also part of that steering committee. And I think Jim is back with us on the call now. Great. First for members of the board, questions for this group.
I have questions.
Yeah, thank you. Go ahead, Joe.
Just a couple of them. One is, so I guess what are you all seeing in terms of use of the web presence? It's great to see that people are populating it. Who's taking advantage of it?
I can take that one. So we definitely see a direct correlation between any sort of outreach that we do and increased use of both the tools and people populating the tools. And so, like I mentioned before, we do have an outreach subcommittee, and we try to put out quarterly newsletters that remind people to update their research or share the tools with members of their department or their organization. We also tend to see spikes in use after our annual meetings each year. But one thing that we're hoping to work on is increasing that sort of outreach and presence. We've seen growth in use of the tool as we've updated it and as the tools continue to be populated, but that's still something we're striving on to increase at all times. One of the fundamental principles of OCOIN is that we want to take this information and not just store it somewhere that's accessible, but the other step is making sure that it's getting to the people that we think it can help.
Do you have a sense of how many users you actually have of the Explorer?
I don't know. So Janine Sawasser at Oregon Explorer is our sort of the person who checks those web metrics. And I think the last time we checked was after the annual meeting. And I think we were somewhere in the mid 100 to 200 users per month range at that point. But like I said, that was near, that was after one of our major outreach events in the annual meeting. I don't know what the last time, I don't know what current metrics would be. I'd ask Janine to check on that and report back.
So I guess if the goal here is to establish or reinforce the partnership between OOST and OCOIN, and to take OCOIN from a purely volunteer effort into something a little bit more robust, I guess what would that take?
Sure, and I think Andy, Elise, and I might all have different answers to this, but I'll start, and you guys can jump in if anything sounds off base or if you guys would like to add anything. But I don't, like Elise mentioned, I don't think a partnership or any sort of support would necessarily be something that would be too heavy of a lift on your end. I think in my mind, what this would look like would be sort of regular meetings or updates for OOST from the OCOIN perspective, so that we can get feedback from both members of the trust and the public on what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong, and what can be improved as far as the data outreach aspect of these original goals that we're setting out to fulfill. And one thing that's been very successful for us in the past that Elise mentioned is that most of our major updates and productivity comes from we're able to support students or graduate students who have an interest in ocean science, education, outreach, or data science that are able to come in and work with our group of professionals for 10 to 12 weeks over the summer and work on doing outreach, building newsletters, providing much needed updates to our software and our virtual presence. And so I think in the future, if a relationship were to be established, one thing that we would look to do is use OOST as like you mentioned before, a funding conduit to sort of find opportunities to support a position like that. In my mind, OCOIN makes a lot of sense as a volunteer-driven organization. I think you could say that way, but as far as the structure of a partnership would go, those would be the biggest things, sort of that reporting and accountability in order to challenge us and kind of grow OCOIN, as well as that small amount of either recurring financial support or a way to help us find that recurring.
Elise, you want to go next?
Either way, sure. I was going to say the other thing that we found is that, so we started out doing in-person meetings tied to State of the Coast. And I think those have been really effective for building community. When funding ran out, we decided to try, at our in-person meeting, it doesn't take a lot of money, but we rent a room where at whatever venue State of the Coast is happening. And then we usually provide lunch for the attendees, which are the order of 25 to 40 people. And we found that's really constructive. We've done online meetings when funding ran out and we didn't have money to rent rooms. And that works and we get a lot of attendees. I don't know that the networking component that people really said they wanted when we created OCOIN happens quite as well over a Zoom webinar. And so some sort of networking event at State of the Coast would be helpful. It doesn't necessarily need to be in the format that we had it originally the first 3 years, which was renting a space the day before. Maybe there's some other way to do it, like at happy hour or something. But it may be useful to have a little bit of support for that networking event, whatever that looks like. And I think the other thing I wanted to say is, I think we don't, all of us are volunteering our time for this and we want it to keep on going. I don't know that we have a ton of ego in our group. Like if it made sense for it to be like under UST or something, I think we would be okay with that. If it makes sense for us to continue to be this independent, sort of volunteer driven organization, I think we're okay with that. But again, I think we're seeing, you know, Sea Grant's been amazing. We're going to get 1 or 2 summer scholars again this summer, which will be excellent. But I don't know if Sea Grant, and maybe Shelby can speak to this, I don't know if this is something that Sea Grant will continue to be able to provide summer scholars for, in which case, you know, knowing that we have some way of hiring grad or undergrad students in the summer to help us update things, as Will was mentioning, would be really helpful. And Andy may have some other ideas as well. There's some other like software and website updates we've talked about, some of which would take more effort and a little more expertise. I think some of those would be one-time, one-off things, or maybe like every 4 or 5 years. But I'm gonna let Andy speak to those because he's more knowledgeable about that sort of stuff.
Yeah, thank you. So I'll just echo the 2 things that resonated most strongly with me were having a body to really help to coordinate the effort. You know, because we are a mostly volunteer group, having somebody do the basic facilitation and operation of keeping the group going is really crucial. So having a grad student or summer scholars on a regular basis, I think would go a long way towards keeping the effort alive. And then I too also heavily promote an in-person networking event when and if such things are able to happen again, hopefully in the nearer term rather than the farther term. So strongly resonate with those ideas. There are some technical enhancements that could be made to the website and the system to better connect kind of human network of people with the information, as well as not only providing links to not only information about the project, because we've to date been focused on project level data. So metadata about the project, which is where it's happening, who's doing it, who might be the funding organization, what the products may be, but also then I think there's an opportunity for us to work within the state's open data initiative, which is a much broader effort that's ongoing right now to actually promote use of state GIS infrastructure to actually serve as a repository for the data itself, so that we can facilitate not only the sharing of information about the projects, but actually the data that comes from the project, so that there could be a comprehensive open data hub for coastal and marine data that's associated with this. So I'll stop there.
So right now it's just the database is metadata and not the data. Is that correct?
Yeah. And to date, it's really been helpful for facilitating collaboration between researchers who may have similar interests. And again, leveraging the limited time and energy we have is very important. But then also on the back end, really trying to make a better effort to make sure that the data that's collected with public monies actually becomes open and publicly available, I do believe is a logical next step towards our group effort.
Yeah, and I also remember those early discussions 10 years ago about being able to use this as a way for scientists and especially young grad students to identify data gaps that exist in the state and use that to inform and help direct their projects. And that has a lot of value as well. When you received that, I don't know if this seed money or the grant from NOAA, how much was that and where did that land? Who served as your fiscal platform for that?
Yeah, so the grant came to, it was a collaborative, but it was, I was the lead PI, so it came to PSU. We subcontracted a chunk of that money back out to INR to create the landing pages for coastal research. So some of their time to do that. And then it supported maybe two grad students during the academic year, maybe one graduate student during the academic year to lead these focus groups and workshops where we figured out what is the need. And then we funded, I believe, 3. Will, were you funded? Yes.
I was the last.
Okay, so
intern.
yeah, so Deanna Carciolo and Adrian Loffer, I can never say her last name, Loffer, and then Will. We funded each of them for a summer, 3 consecutive summers, to sort of make incremental progress on the project. And you know, some of Will's work included doing outreach to research offices at Oregon universities, and then also to Sea Grant to try to embed you know, the research landing page as something that is an expectation when you get a grant to do research in Oregon, that you would also add that research to the landing page. And I think Will was very successful with Sea Grant. I don't know, I think it was slower going with the research offices at U of O, OSU, and PSU, and I don't know that we've landed on that being institutionalized at those, but Will can speak to that.
That's correct. We have connections with those offices, but there's nothing codified like the relationship that we have with Sea Grant to date.
Do you remember how much that funding amount? I'm trying to get a sense of the scope of kind of what you've done, what you used in the past to get this far.
Yeah, I believe it was around I can double check, but I think it was around 145,000, and that was you know, again, there was a lot of pre-work. Oh, and it also funded our annual meeting for 3 years. So yeah, so I would say it was probably 4 years of work. And again, I think that there was a lot of work early on that, you know, we've done that part. So I don't, yeah, I don't think that it would cost $145,000 for 4 years now, right? Like total for 4 years. I think it would be much cheaper. I think the other thing I was thinking about is, you know, one of the things that we've tried to figure out is, I think that the public would be interested in some of these data. And I think that there's other decision makers in the state would be interested, but we haven't necessarily been as successful as we would like at getting this on people's radar, right? So all of you and the people you work with and the agencies like ODF&W and DLCD, right? They are all aware. A couple of folks in the Coastal Caucus, I think, are aware of it, but probably not the whole Coastal Caucus. So yeah, I think figuring out, you know, maybe that doesn't take a lot of money. Maybe it's through some other initiative that UST is doing that this can be promoted, that it exists as a resource for folks.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting because honestly, you know, I was part of the Nearshore Research Task Force, and I've been on UST. So you've presented to us before, and I talked to Andy quite a bit. And yet when this came to me about a month ago, I was like, who, what? So you know, somehow something's not tracking. There's some kind of a traction problem there. I don't know exactly what that is, but I bet others have that same. It's another acronym that starts with O that does something in the state with oceans and science. One of the other questions I have for you is there an analog to this in California and Washington, and any ongoing ties or collaboration or interest therein?
From my perspective, I think the closest analog is actually at the regional level in the work that I do as a part of the West Coast Ocean Data Portal. We heard that mentioned earlier, but we as a data portal have been the kind of lead entity for not only kind of coordinating data, but also the staff within the agencies and tribal governments who work on providing ocean and coastal related data. And so I would say that's the closest analog. And it's important to both network people as well as the information that comes from them. The resilience of the system depends upon both.
I was also going to add, when we held the working group at PSU, probably 3 or 4 years ago, to really nail down, okay, what are the pieces? What is this going to look like? Are we going to, at that time we had a discussion, are we going to house the data or are we going to house the metadata? But anyway, when we were planning it, we reached out to NOAA. I don't remember the exact process, but basically we ended up connecting with a woman that is sort of coordinates, I think, data management for the Southeast region with NOAA. And she ended up, I don't know, convincing her unit to cover her costs to come out and be a moderator for our workshop, because what we are trying to do in Oregon is somewhat similar to what the Southeast region is doing. But again, we're trying to do it at a state level. And so her input was helpful. I don't know, Andy, I don't remember her name. I don't know if you remember her name, but yeah, I think NOAA was really interested in this. They obviously funded us, but they were interested in it being successful because they felt like what's going on in the Southeast is working and useful, and that not a lot of other regions have this kind of data network. So yeah, that doesn't really answer a question about this region, but I think that sort of on a broader scale nationally, it's something that's not very well established yet.
Thank you. Other questions from the board?
Yeah, I just want to follow up on your remarks, Laura, and ask about the marketing and outreach committee. And I see Hillary's is here with us, and how you are planning on doing more of that outreach to perhaps get some additional funding support from others. Because I think, as Laura said, sometimes when you have a lot of acronyms, you don't necessarily know what's the niche that's really going to be unique and attractive to potential funders. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about that real quick before we take a break.
Hi, I'm new to the group, so I'll just speak from what I know so far. One of the projects that we just recently discussed, in addition to the things that Elise and Andy mentioned already, is putting together a survey that will go out to the people who attended the most recent meeting, and including in that survey questions like, what other users do you know of that maybe should connect with this, recommendations for that sort of thing, and how personally are you able to use this tool, and also questions like, what can we do to the tool to make it more useful for your projects? That's one of the projects or one of the goals that we've been trying to address recently. Andy can probably add on to the rest of our list.
I can, I'll hop on really quick. One of the ways that, in addition to sort of going through our current network of people that we've already engaged with, one of the ways that we've tried moving forward in the past was something Elise alluded to a little bit before, which is developing those institutional partnerships and trying to sort of get the word out that way, right? Because if we're able to make connections with Oregon State University, Portland State University, Oregon Sea Grant, and even community level groups like Haystack Rock, and we start getting our name out into their materials, or codified in grant language, like it is in Oregon Sea Grant. That's one way that we were really hoping to sort of build our network and increase name recognition. The flaw with that is that there's only so many trees that you can bark up within the state of Oregon before you sort of run out of doors to knock on. And I think that's also part of the reason we wanted to come to you guys today, is because but we've been working on that initiative, and we've kind of continued our outreach for the same way for the last couple of years. And we think having some sort of partnership or even potential oversight with an organization like may sort of give us a little bit more, not name recognition, but a little bit more of a foundation to build off of in that outreach sector. But B, it would also be invaluable for us to sort of get the perspective of representatives from other sectors within the coastal and management communities that sit on this trust and people who attend these meetings as well. So that was another thing that we talked about in our last steering committee meeting, as well as being a benefit of potentially reconnecting with UST, is getting the perspective from people on the trust and potentially using a relationship with the trust to amplify the work that we're doing.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Thanks. That was really helpful. And thanks for all the years of volunteer work you're doing here to try to make this go. So appreciate it very much.
Great. Any other questions? I appreciate the update. It's got me kind of thinking. I mean, it's funding science is a challenge. It's easier when you've got some kind of a connection to the general public, at least politically. And from the foundation perspective, I think the challenge that's really noticeable here is that your audience is really limited to the science community, and you provide a service to the science community. And I don't know if it's been talked about in any of your meetings, but for some reason I keep thinking of like some kind of a subscription model that perhaps your service isn't exactly free. Maybe it's based on some kind of a subscription if you have enough entities that find value in it and are willing to do that. And maybe there are some non-paid users as well, but I don't know. That's just a thought that comes to mind. Maybe we're going to talk at the end of this meeting about our next meeting date and follow-ups, and as we are able to kind of transition the Marine Reserves project into action, away from fundraising and into action. Maybe this is something that the board can work with you all on. We come from the same primordial stew, so to speak, and definitely, at least in my opinion, there's a lot of shared purpose and values in what we're doing. So I think we'll keep it open. Yes, Elise?
Yeah, I wanted to clarify in case it wasn't clear. I think part of our goal is to connect the scientific community, but when we first formed OCOIN, the need that we saw that was presented to us was really by folks from state agencies that felt like they didn't always know when they were working on projects, or even when decision makers were considering putting forth legislation, that they didn't always know what data were available in the state because there was no sort of clearinghouse. And so sometimes there would be data available on a topic or data coming out soon, and they wouldn't be aware of it. So, initially the goal was really to provide sort of a place where people could go to figure out what research is ongoing and what types of data might be available in the next 6 months, year, 2 years, 5 years. Mm-hmm. More for decision makers than for other scientists, but I think like it's evolved to be also this opportunity for, as you mentioned, Laura, for graduate students to see where the big data gaps are in the state, or for new faculty moving to the state, new faculty in the state to see what kinds of collaborators there might be. But I think you're right, like following more along that initial thread of how do we connect with the decision makers and the agencies that that don't have time to go and knock on doors and figure out what data are available to advance the projects or make decisions on the projects they're working on, I think is an important thing that OCOIN can contribute to. But I think, yeah, getting some new ideas from outside of our team of how to better promote the existence of the landing page and the fact that we have this network, that folks can come and attend the annual meeting, and hopefully one day again we'll all be in person and there will be networking opportunities. I think, you know, maybe our ideals are a little stale at this point because we've all been kind of going on this circle for several years, and getting some outside input would be really helpful.
Okay. Well, keep us in the loop, and maybe as your group meets again, I think one thing that might be useful for us as we reconnect in the future would be just to see what that list of proposed activities and costs would be, so that we could see where it would be best to direct based on the amount of funding that you need and the kinds of activities that you're trying to do. So the typical one-two pager would be really useful.
Great, thanks.
Okay, great.
Thank
Anything else on this agenda item before we take a short break?
I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of Ocoin for allowing us to attend and kind of share where we're at. We really appreciate this opportunity.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Let's see. By my clock, it's 1:46. Let's reconvene at just before 2 o'clock. And we'll take the agenda on home. All right. Thank you.
I'm back, Laura. You're muted though.
Oh, yes, I am. Okay. For the second time today. Welcome back.
My connection is horrible today for some reason. It's dropped 3 or 4 times. I'm getting most of it.
Okay. It is recorded. If there's parts in particular that you need to review, I'm sure Lonnie or Andrea can.
Well, it goes on as a YouTube, doesn't it? Video. Is it?
Yep, it does get posted to DSL's YouTube
Right.
site.
Okay.
And then I will also link it to the meeting date as well.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, I was an early participant in developing the Ocoin project. It was kind of an outgrowth of a spreadsheet of information that we'd collected in UST, but it has gone way beyond me, and I haven't been an active participant for several years. So I'm not sure if I have any role. I mean, it's moved over more into the mechanism of the information distribution rather than the information itself.
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a smart idea, almost, I hate to say a no-brainer when like we were in Nearshore Research Task Force, but these things just don't happen by themselves. They require, it requires constant curation and coordination and support to keep it going. So I think they're definitely finding that's the point they're at now.
Right.
Right, I'm going to put a call out in the chat bar for names of people who would like to give public comment. We'll wait till 2 to get started. A lot of a few public people left. It's actually shaped up to be a decent day here at the coast. I think it's pretty gnarly out at sea though. I was a little worried about our ability to get crab for our dock boxes this week, and I sent a text to my former business partner who's a crab fisherman and said, hey, any chance you can help us out? He's like, yeah, I'm gonna sneak out and get back in before the weather gets bad. I'll get you your 200 pounds. It's like, oh, good. Partners for life, really. Even if we're not business partners, he still makes sure we're taken care of. But the ocean's been pretty big and raucous out there last few days.
Laura, do you know how the season's been?
All the earlier reports I've heard are that it's pretty weak compared to recent years. I always take that with a grain of salt until I actually see the data, because fishermen have a tendency to say, oh yeah, no, there's nothing going on out there. But I don't know, I've heard it enough. I think that it's actually true. And I don't know if Karin has any ODF&W reports yet, but it didn't look like it got really strong out of the gate. Karin, do you know anything?
Yeah, we have, you know, the fishery is open from Cape Falcon south. We still have the northernmost part of the state delayed with Washington, because Washington has biotoxin elevated levels in razor clams and crab. We're not finding that in our own samples. So that said, everything south of Falcon is open, but the Gold Beach, Brookings area, the reports are that the volume of crab is just terrible, meaning there just isn't any crab. And so a lot of vessels have moved up further north to Charleston or north of there to fish. But that said, on Monday, the progress report so far was that the price per pound was, I don't know, $3.75, which is high for the beginning of the season, and that there had been $20 million of crab landed. So that's a good start, even despite the circumstances. But point taken that it's, you know, the Brookings and the Astoria communities are hurting because of the problems at the bookends.
Well, the fact that it's pretty hard to move crab through the export markets and just into a lot of traditional markets, of all years to have a low year, this is probably a good one from a market standpoint. So hopefully the price will reflect that. But yeah, if they've already got a third of the annual average revenues in the first 3 weeks of the season, that's pretty good. All right, well, we shall resume our meeting of the Oregon Ocean Science Trust, picking up on our agenda for Wednesday, January 27th, 2021 at public comment. Are there members of the public on this call who would like to make public comment? Please just type your name into the chat box and I'll just call on you in order. And make sure people have a moment to reach their chat box, but it's possible we do not have anyone who would care to sign up for public comment at this time.
We did have someone just join by phone as well.
Yes, I see we have someone joining by phone that does not have a name associated with their Zoom box. Would you please just identify, introduce yourself for the telephone number ending in 2997?
Laura, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, this is Gina Carter.
Oh,
just
hi,
rejoining
Gina.
in a different format.
Okay, thank you for coming back. We had your name on your box earlier. Now it's your phone number. Just like to know who's on the call with us. Okay, well.
Yep, sure thing.
And as we're got Jeff just rejoined us, just making sure if there's any members of the public who would like to provide public comment, this is the time on the agenda to do so. Barring that, we can move on to member updates and other business. So for member updates and other business, do we have any updates from our members?
Nope.
Nothing for me.
I can provide just a quick update. So I think as you might have heard me allude to earlier, tomorrow we have our STAC meeting. So we'll be talking a little bit about the Marine Reserve assessment. and hopefully move forward with that. From an Oregon Sea Grant perspective, and this is just an FYI, we have released our biennial research competition. The research objectives that we have are not too different than what we've had in the past, really focusing on coastal marine hazards and stressors, market or non-market aspects of coastal and marine resources, thinking about social, cultural, political attitudes with respect to critical coastal and marine issues, and of course, thinking about ecological and or socioeconomic resilience of our marine species or habitats. So this is just a reminder, competition that we do run regularly, and it takes just about a year from start to execution. So that's the RFP is open. So feel free to share for anyone who might be interested.
Thanks, Shelby.
How many projects were funded last year for how much money out of your competition from 2020?
So the last round, I think, had 5 projects, and the average is $115,000 per year for 2 years. Well, that's the maximum amount requested, and folks are variable within that.
Okay. Any other member updates? We do have one item for other business, and that is just the recognition that our non-voting member seat formerly held by Senator Roblin has been vacated, and just to recognize that as per our bylaws, the way that seat gets filled is through appointment by the president of the Senate for the Senate member. In the case of the House member, it's the Speaker of the House of Representatives. So the appointment of that seat will be up to Senate President Peter Courtney. And Representative Gomberg did jump on this call very early, like 10 minutes or so before we started the meeting, to say that he had a conflict and was not going to be able to join us. I did speak with him briefly about it. Maybe by our next meeting, we'll have some update on that. In terms of, potential candidates, it does not need to be a coastal senator. Dick Anderson is the senator that has replaced Arnie Roblin's District 5 seat, so he would be kind of an obvious choice in some regards for this. But there are other senators. One that came to my mind was Senator Michael Dembrow, who is the chair of the Senate Environment and Natural Resources Committee. I've testified before him in his committee on behalf of OOST many times, and he's shown himself to be a very strong supporter of our organization and our cause generally. So that would be another option, but it's a little out of our hands. So I'll continue to talk to Representative Gomberg, and hopefully by our next meeting, maybe we'll have an update or possibly even an appointment. I'm not sure. So any questions on that? Okay.
Laura, just a quick question. So is Representative Gomberg still going to remain as the non-voting member here?
Yes, yes. Yeah, it's just the session schedule right now is just very intense, and he had a series of meetings today. So, but yeah, no, he definitely is made every indication that he intends to continue on his seat.
I'm just curious about the Senate president and whether it would be a good idea to do any outreach and talk about an update on OOST with him.
I do think that's a good idea. And maybe we could get that on the agenda for, maybe we could even get that on the agenda possibly, or are you thinking just a one-on-one outreach? Because I'm thinking of scheduling right now is really difficult for anybody in session.
Well, I was thinking about it because I've just been doing some outreach for the Gorge Commission and speaking with some individual senators, literally doing like 5 or 10 minute just updates. And I know they are really very busy, but there might be an opportunity at least to try to do a one-on-one with Senator Courtney, just to give him an update and see what, kind of spur him on to do the appointment.
Okay, well, I'll reach out to our member Representative Gomberg and see if maybe he can help facilitate something in that regard for us. It's a good recommendation.
Good, thank you. I think that's a good way to go.
And any other business before we get into some scheduling considerations? Okay, I wanted to just acknowledge and apologize for kind of what seemed to be a little bit of a moving target on scheduling for this meeting. My sense is that it puts a lot on you all and a lot on staff to try to get something scheduled on the fly. And I wanted to just make a suggestion, and this actually was something that was suggested from staff in an outline of just kind of the process of scheduling, is maybe we could just pick a regular meeting schedule for the year. I know this is kind of hard to do right now on the phone, but like, for example, if we said we were going to meet the first Wednesday of each quarter, then we could just get that on our schedules and move on with not having to try to worry so much. And it would also be helpful because we have people who want to present to us, and if I don't have a meeting scheduled in advance, then it's just makes a lot of extra work. I was actually going to throw out the first Wednesday of each quarter, with our next meeting being April 7th, subsequently July 7th and November 3rd, which would be one approach that we might take. We can doodle that out, but I think it would be nice for all of us just to have something on the books. And I felt a little remiss that we went such a long period without meeting last year between July and now. And I want to make sure that we, stay consistent with our scheduling.
Laura, I think that's a great idea.
I do too.
Having a known date and time would be helpful.
Why don't you all put in the next meeting date for April 7th from 12 to 3, and then subsequently July 7th and then November 3rd. And if conflicts arise that are, there's going to be times when maybe one of us can't attend a meeting, but generally speaking, we've been pretty good at being able to keep our schedule going.
Is it November or October?
Oh, I'm sorry. I guess that is October. I got the wrong month for the first one. So what would be the first Wednesday in October? The 6th? Lonnie and Andrea, does that approach, I didn't run that by you first, but would that approach be useful for you both?
Perfect.
Yes, that would be great. And I can post it. I can actually post it early onto the public meeting calendar website as well.
Great. So for our next meeting, we should have the ability to update on marine reserves. There's one name that keeps coming up in our conversations in different ways, and I was wondering if it might be a good idea to try to invite them to a meeting, and that's the Institute for Natural Resources. Shelby, do you think that would be something worthwhile to get to know them a little better?
I'm certain that Lisa would be more than happy to speak to this group.
Great. The other one that came up today is the Oregon Conservation and Recreation Fund. Davia Palmieri from ODF&W and Dr. Carl Winner is the chair of that. It might be good to connect with them and kind of think down the road on where they're headed. And we have a lot of potential collaborative things we could be working on. Yeah. Okay. Are there other recommendations from the board in terms of things that you'd like to see in our meeting agenda this year? I think we all get excited to actually do stuff. We need to be connected and informed with partners and what's going on around the state, but we need to try to balance that with, you know, keeping something meaningful happening for the organization. So hopefully we'll have a little bit of both, but anything else right now, or you can always send me an email with any thoughts that you might have.
Laura, I think the only other thing that I might suggest for the April meeting is just kind of a pulse on how things are going with the long session.
Okay.
Hi, Laura, this is Steve. It's an idea and maybe not something for April or even July, but I would be interested in getting an update from the Oregon Global Warming Commission and the work that they're doing to identify kind of the role of coastal and marine habitats in Oregon's strategy to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, both from a reduction standpoint and a sequestration standpoint. I know that they are looking at trying to figure out what their plan is and who's in charge of collecting what data and what science to inform kind of how the state approaches implementing Governor Brown's orders and mandates on that. So there might be some overlap with, there might be some good overlap there, I think, potentially.
Great.
But not anything urgent, you know, something we could think about later.
Yeah, maybe for July. Okay. All right. Any other topics of interest before we adjourn our meeting? All right. Well, best to you, Shelby, and your stack meeting tomorrow. I'm excited to see the project get hopefully launched close to on schedule. It's great because there's such a big time frame that you and the others have given to this process, probably from years of experience of knowing how long it takes these things to come together. I can say honestly, when I was talking with funders about the project and they're like, really, this is for 2023, you know, because they're used to a lot shorter time frames. So I have no doubt that we'll be able to meet that mandate. Great. Well, thank you all for a great meeting today, and we'll see you in April.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you. Sounds good. Nice to
Adjourned.
see everybody.
Thank you, Laura. Nice to see everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.